Welcome to another webinar on our resilience study here at Thrive West Central. My name is John Ford. I am the Director of Business Development for Thrive West Central. Today, our focus will be on education, and we're honored to have the Commissioner of Indiana Commission for Higher Education, Chris Lowery. Good morning, Chris.
Hey, good morning, John. Thanks so much for having me. I'm just so glad to be here and talk about these topics with you and those who will end up viewing this recording.
Well, great. Well, you have a very unique background. You worked for federal legislators, you worked for manufacturing, been an administrator at Ivy Tech, also a school board member. How have these experiences, or how do you think these experiences will help you with the challenges of being the new commissioner for the Commission on Higher Education?
Yeah, well, thank you. I like to believe throughout my 30-some year career that I've been led to do certain work, and I've certainly grown with each step. And real quickly, obviously, but about the first 10 years of my professional life was spent in public policy, a year on Capitol Hill, and then most of the rest of it at the Indiana State House, working with members of the legislature, the governor back at that time, working for him and so forth. But I had a real taste for public policy and also saw what changes could take place. I raise this because my really early introduction to the ways in which public policy could have impact was while working for then Governor Bob Ward and on the A+ program for educational excellence. And it was really one of the nation's first moves toward education reform, and really looking at accountability, looking at ways to help make sure our children have all the advantages that other students do throughout the country and frankly, globally. So that was where I whetted my appetite. After about 10 years in public policy, I was approached by Hillenbrand, a great publicly traded company here in Indiana, down in Batesville, which is where my wife and I live and raised our children. And, just was so blessed to be able to do a variety of things there, from, marketing and strategy and sales and operations, involved in the acquisition side of the business, new business development and so forth. And I think for me, that was important also and very additive as I look at the role I'm in now, because I have spent time in business. I've spent a lot of time in business, running, operations and divisions and so forth within an amazing company. I, as you might guess, still have a lot of friends there and see them all the time. So I think that was important because we've got to have the linkage between our education system and our employer community so that people can thrive economically and socially. About 8 years ago this time, unexpectedly, some folks knocked on my door because I had, in my last role with Hillenbrand for about the last 5 years there, I had been involved on behalf of the company in public policy, in K-12 education, higher education, workforce development, and so forth, and had gotten to know, quite a bit of the Indiana higher education ecosystem, and specifically Ivy Tech. We structured some really neat partnerships between our local school corporation, where I also happened to be school board president at the time, Hillenbrand and other companies, and Ivy Tech. And I still think they're pretty unique models, and there have been a lot of successes there that we're all trying to continue to grow. But during that time, then I was approached about a role with Ivy Tech, and I have to admit, I kind of looked over my shoulder and said, "Are you talking to me?" I've got this great job I love with just I think just an amazing company, and still do think that about Hillenbrand. And they said, "Yeah, we are, because you've got this policy background, you've got this business background, you understand the work of Ivy Tech, so entertain this." And I truly thought it was a calling, thought and prayed about it a lot, and came back and said, "Yeah, I'm interested." And so I took the role of a regional chancellor. They used to have very large regions, and so it was basically all of southeastern Indiana. And then when President Ellspermann came to the college, having been lieutenant governor, and she and I had worked on workforce and other things together, she asked me to stand up the workforce side of the college, which I did for about 5.5 years before responding to what I thought would be a really really good next step and purposeful calling in my life, which is with the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. So in public policy, the private sector experience in higher ed, and having built something within higher ed that I I feel good about, that the focus on workforce development and opportunities for Hoosiers and for our employer partners. All those things come together. I'll let others be the judge whether those things have worked well and whether what we're getting ready to do here at the commission is going to work well. But I'm very hopeful.
Well, I think certainly your unique background is you're kind of the right person at the right time, as coming out of COVID, a lot of questions on workforce and how K through 12 and higher education and workforce all come together to move our state forward. So I'm looking forward to your tenure at the commission. But as we look at the impact of COVID, and with our resilient study, our focus was on West Central Indiana and really trying to see the impact that COVID-19 had on our region. And in the education space, really, came down to learning loss. And we're not unique. Learning loss has impacted the nation, Indiana, and obviously West Central. Any thoughts on kind of the experience that Indiana is having on learning loss?
Yeah, I think you point out, pardon me, something really important. We're not the only place, right, that students have experienced learning losses, but I think it's one of those things we're really going to have to be mindful of, and we're really going to have to think about how we help to make up those gaps. I was looking at some economic data just very recently in the last couple of weeks, and whether it was the way in which jobs were lost and the economy rebounded, whether it was the stock market.
I think we lost him.
March of 2020. What we saw were the slopes of the curve had fairly quick rebounds. Some might say they were V-shaped recoveries, right? And you see that in a lot of places. That's not the case with the learning loss for our children. Those have not rebounded. The slope of the curve has not continued, as we would want it to. So I think there's a lot of serious work we have to do. The learning for, I think, those of us who who are involved in policy, those who are engaged in leading school corporations, teaching in classrooms. We have an opportunity to learn from not only what has not gone well, which is the root of this, the learning loss of a lot of children, but where things might have gone right. And I think there's some really great examples. So as we're affected going into the future, how might we handle something as significant as this, right? Society basically closed, and how do we do that? But we also saw that some schools didn't do that. I was just talking a few days ago with a school leader, a school corporation leader, who talked about the 2021 school year for that school corporation, having been in school, in classes, 180 days, which of course is the required number of days. They're an exception. But I think, as we prospectively look, how would we handle these kind of things in the future? We can look to those kind of instances and say, how did they do that? Could we do that other places? Because let's face it, right? We were all learning during that time, what's right, what's not. And I'm not saying that everyone should have stayed open or should have closed, just saying there's learning there. I think also looking at, intercession and how do we make up the learning loss, whether it's, during breaks, what are the additional tools that we can utilize for students? How prepared are we as things like this happen, or to even fortify the regain in learning with technology for our students? I know you and others have worked on that topic. Do students have technology so that not only we're prepared if something like this happens again, but as part of the recouping of those learning losses, could we, do things that involve technology to help that student, make up the, the dip in the slope of that curve?
Yes, certainly, broadband and digital inclusion, really came to light out of during the time of COVID. And I think that's also impacted learning loss and how we recover. So obviously the state is spending a lot of time and a lot of money on broadband and digital inclusion. Are you seeing any unique programs out there in the state that are trying to tackle the broadband issue?
I will tell you something I thought is really unique, and it's not broadband, but it is along technology, and it speaks really to not only learning loss, and this is getting into the collegiate side of it, but also students having the tools they need. Before I left, and I can't claim credit for it, before I left Ivy Tech some months back, led by President Ellspermann, the college adopted an inclusive tuition policy, and with that, essentially what that guaranteed is that every student would have her or his course materials, and that's a really big deal, thinking in that instance, because first of all, a lot of students who attend Ivy Tech, have a lot of barriers they face. Sometimes they're financial, right? Some of those roadblocks that they have, whether it's financial, family, the commitments and so forth. And, our analysis said that oftentimes we could identify, like a very high percentage of the time, students who literally were going to withdraw or fail in the semester by when they did or didn't purchase their course materials. That if it was into the semester, there was a high likelihood were not going to be successful. And certainly if they did not purchase those, for some, financial reason or otherwise, that they weren't going to be successful. Again, very high percentage of the time. So that idea now has it such that every student, when she or he signs up for the course, the materials are included. And right, so from the day one, as soon as they're registered, they've got those materials. And I don't know the statistics yet, but I think Sue Ellspermann would tell you that the success then, the retention rates of students are really improving. Back to the broadband issue, what I did see a lot of was, with school corporations, colleges and universities and so forth, placing out hotspots, not only for their students, but allowing others in the community to use hotspots by coming to their parking lots. Also working with philanthropy to provide, technology, philanthropy, business, to do those kind of things. Gosh, I made it out a lot during, the lockdown of the pandemic, because I was really wanting to see how a lot of these challenges were being met, and spent time at a lot of even community and faith-based organizations, masked up outside, but saw some real ingenuity, for example, with some community and faith-based organizations to couple some things to bring people to what they might need. Services like food distribution coupled with Wi-Fi access, along with information about next level jobs, workforce ready grants, in a church parking lot. And, that's the kind of stuff that, I stepped back and thought, those are the approaches we can take, not only to, address some of the impact that we saw, for example, with the pandemic, but as we go forward, you and I've talked, we've got some heavy lifts to do. We see a decline in the college going rate and those things. And I'm a firm believer that, government and education isn't going to do this alone. And that, philanthropy, not-for-profits like community and faith-based organizations, business have got to be part of that solution. And I saw some remarkable work. Give you one example of what I saw as sort of a triangle that, I'm in Indianapolis today, my office, and, a very unique partnership between Shepherd Community, which is a community and faith-based organization on the east side of Indianapolis, Ivy Tech, and One America. And it was so unique because, as individuals had, limited access to technology, limited ability to, perhaps go find out information about programs and things, limited abilities to maybe reach out for job opportunities and so forth, that the organizations came together and said, Shepherd Community serves the east side of Indianapolis, and individuals in the neighborhood know and trust that messenger, if you will. And so from technology to food distribution, sort of the gamut, but with the intentionality of saying, how do we really help that person either get some training and or education and get back to work, or maybe in the role that they have today, come out with something more rewarding to them.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it really does seem through COVID, on the positive end, we all did come together and were creative in finding solutions. And certainly we did that with broadband. One other area in the resilience study that we found that affected K through 12 and higher education is mental health. It feels like coming out of COVID, the data is showing that, people are really suffering from mental health. Any thoughts on that, or what might you be seeing out there in your world?
John, it's a great question. I was in a couple of different meetings yesterday, and one that Secretary Katie Jenner, Kara Herring, who leads diversity and equity initiatives on behalf of the governor, and I hosted. And mental health was, I would say, the main topic we kept coming back to. We were talking about, academic and career preparedness for students in K-12, and then, that going rate or the matriculation to higher ed, and, various populations of students who really need a lift and really need help. And the topic kept coming back to mental health. Study after study says that, what you were just talking about is quantifiably real. I think we have to have an increased emphasis on mental health. I know our Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch has been focusing on this, and she's quite an advocate for it. You and I have talked about it before. We see that that's a real struggle, and whether it's in K-12, whether it's in higher ed, whether it's in the workplace, I think we've got work to do there. And that's not just Indiana. I think very broadly, that when you look at statistics around, broadly mental health, but areas like depression, areas like suicide, that, those are alarming. I wish I had the solutions, but I think it's going to take, concerted effort. Again, my view with sort of the civil society lens on is that it's really got to be a concerted effort of a five sort of sided approach to it, that government needs to lead and is leading, government, education, business, philanthropy, and the what I think is so rich, the not-for-profit organizations that reach individuals who oftentimes, maybe we don't through the other avenues, right? Maybe we don't reach well in the workplace, or maybe we don't reach well at school. I think it's going to have to be an area in which we focus.
Yeah, and I think, this week, the launch of the 988 nationally, that number is a giant step forward, especially dealing with teen suicide and, depression. I think, having that resource for people to call. And now that we have the federal government and the state government throwing their weight behind a national line, I think it's a giant step forward.
I think it is too. That came up yesterday in this conversation I was referring to, and several years ago, many years ago now, in our family, there was a suicide, and it's, I think certainly everyone experiences loss, with family, friends, with loved ones, and I know it's never easy, but that is one that, when it occurs, there's so many questions, that loved ones are asking. And as I saw that occurring with with the launch or relaunch, if you will, I was really heartened by it, because I think it's just a significant challenge we have to address.
Well, changing subjects just a little bit, what is the great takeaway from the Intel announcement that we had a few months back, as it pertains to workforce?
Yeah. To me, I think the great takeaway, and then frankly, we saw results yesterday pointing toward my belief and my optimism in our state. The takeaway for me was, just especially thinking of higher education, is that higher education, the ecosystem, and the individual institutions of higher education and training have to really be part of the solution that we put forth for for technology.
Yes.
And advanced solutions that are part of our economic development strategy. That I actually was with last week out in
Okay.
I was actually with out in Boston last week, my counterpart from Ohio. And I asked him about it. I said, "So, Randy, tell me how you all did this. What do you think the secret sauce was in it?" And he talked about their ecosystem and really being at the table early and so forth. I am seeing that now. You probably saw the big announcement at Purdue yesterday, a nearly $2 billion investment in the chip industry with Skywater. It's just a pretty amazing announcement. And to me, part of the power was education, and especially higher education was at the table very early on, helping everyone who was putting that deal together understand what assets we could bring to the table. I'm convinced that, especially as we think about economic development, growth, innovation, that the key as we go forward is going to be human capital. We have perhaps the best story in the nation to tell, from the fiscal capital side of it. Great position fiscally, we're great place, a tax, regulatory environment, so forth, infrastructure, et cetera, to do business. We also have stunningly good higher education institutions. I found out recently we are 14th best in the nation of attracting students to our state, because we have a good value here between our public and private institutions. And, we have to make sure we're really leveraging those assets, because whether it's Intel or Skywater or, my old employer, Hillenbrand, and many others, the human capital side of this is just absolutely key to their equation, right? Because they're making investments that aren't just 5 and 10 and 20 years. They're thinking 50 years and even longer. So, for me, that's the learning in that. And I wasn't involved. I'm certain the state put its very best foot forward. But I also know and saw the effect with the announcement yesterday that human capital was a huge part of what that investor was looking at, and state was able to say, we can deliver.
Commissioner, can we hold on 1 second? I've lost sound on my end.
Oh.
Gabe, can you hear me? Gabe? Commissioner, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Now you're back. Okay. All right. Well, we're recording this, so we'll edit this stuff out. But
that's good. Yeah.
So I didn't hear all of your answers. So I'll if I repeat myself, I apologize. But
not at all.
Right. So, Commissioner, moving to, you recently had published a college readiness report. What were some significant findings in there that really intrigued you?
Pardon me. You know, I would look at it this way. You know, a lot of what was in the report, pardon me. You know, a lot of what was in the report and has caught the headlines are those places where we're sounding the alarm. You know, interesting and alarming to me, right? That our college going rate is now 53%. That was a 6-point drop in 1 year. It was a 12-point drop in 5 years. So from 65% of our graduating high school students going on to something next, you know, 1 year certificate, 4 year, 2 year. So from 65% to 53%, and you know that's alarming because again, human capital is what investors are looking for. You know, those folks who want to invest in our economy and grow jobs and so forth. You know, and within those data, it was also interesting and alarming to learn that those declines were even sharper in some areas as you disaggregate the data, and that in some areas we have reached points where they're becoming so significantly low that if it doesn't have our attention, then we're not awake. So as an example, the college going rate has declined to 44% of Hispanic and Latino students. It's declined to 43% for Black students. And for men, it's the first time in the commission, you know, reporting and gathering this data that it's 46%, the 61% for females, 46% for males, and that gap widens. You know, I have real concern about what then is happening, you know, let's say with males who are choosing not to go to some training or education after high school. You know, some folks said to me shortly after we released the report, they said, so do you think it's that those individuals are going into the workplace, or maybe they're taking a gap year, especially because wages have been increasing? And I said, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. So we went and looked at it. And unfortunately, when you look at men of that age, 18, 19, and you look at their labor participation rate, it has also been declining while their college going rate has been declining. So for me, you know, there's a great concern. Then what are they doing? And again, one notion was, well, maybe they're taking a gap year. You know, that seems to be kind of in vogue for the last several years. And sure, actually, students who have stopped out, it's a very slim percentage, 2%, who after the gap year, again, they've said, hey, I'm going to take a gap year and then I'll go. Only 2% of them actually end up doing it. So I have this concern, you know, what's happening there. So you know, if we look at the data points that got the attention, you know, the 53% going rate, you know, the percentages around men, Hispanic and Latino students, Black students. If we look at those things, those certainly get our attention, and we've got to address them. What I found real hopeful, though, too, is in some data that we've used then to develop some of our recommendations, like 21st Century Scholars. You know, a proven program, an area the state has generously invested for 32 years now. Low-income students, as you know, they enter the 21st Century Scholar Program as 7th or 8th graders, and they get a lot of support so that they can someday attend college. The going rate for those students is 81%. Right. Wow. So here are students from low-income homes with a lot of barriers and so forth, but who get the right supports and they go to college and they're successful. So in that instance, you know, what we've looked at is said and have said is, how can we get more students to be part of 21st Century Scholars? Because in the data, we also found that only 48% of those kids who are eligible actually get signed up. And, you know, you got to get signed up to be part of it. So we're calling for the auto enroll of any student who qualifies. So, you know, if that student qualifies, let's get them enrolled and let's get those supports around them, because we know it's a successful program. Other data that we found real hope in is, students with honors diploma attend, 80 some percent attend. So great. How can we help keep pointing students toward these things that are successful? Students who, pardon me, take dual credit and complete the Indiana College Core, which is that block of 30 hours, fully transferable, how can we get more students to earn that block of credit, that 30 hours by the time they graduate? Because over 90% of those students go on to college or university. And then lastly, I would say the other thing that, and I know you and I talked about this, that is really interesting is around the economic data. There are questions about the value proposition of higher education and, the affordability, is it quality, is it career relevant? And we have to address those things. We have to make sure all of those things are being addressed. We've also got to make sure people know the full picture. And, from an economic standpoint, I think it's easy to point to the one-off stories and say, well, students go to college, they have $200,000 in debt, and, they end up pouring coffee for a living. Well, that makes it, a story for someone to talk about, but that's not actually the average, right? In Indiana, if a student graduates with debt, undergrad, it's less than $30,000. I wish it were none, but that's a whole lot different than a couple $100,000. The wage premium between the average high school diploma holder and the average bachelor's degree or higher holder is 80%. The difference is between $39,000 average and $72,000 average. That's wow. That's incredible. The unemployment rate for the average high school diploma holder is 5 times what it is for someone with a bachelor's degree or higher. That doesn't mean everyone needs a bachelor's degree or higher, right? Because there are a lot of great high demand, high value, high wage jobs that don't require that. But oftentimes, almost all the time, they require something, right? They require that certification from the American Welding Society. Welders make a great living, and right. We have far too few of them, but you got to have that credential. The same, in a lot of places in IT and in healthcare and, a lot of different parts of the economy. So, the big things that came out of the report to me are, look, we've got these data points that show us we've got a challenge. We've got to reverse these trends. We know there are promising practices and promising areas of and things the state does, like 21st Century Scholar, Indiana College Core, the O'Bannon Grant, a number of those things that they work. And so how can we make sure students are doing more of those things and having more access to them, and then realizing that the economic data are just absolutely clear. A credential, whether it's a certificate or a 4-year degree or something else after high school, is just an imperative, because almost every new job being created requires something more than a high school diploma.
Yeah, going back just a little bit to the comments on the 21st Century Scholar Program, the Wabash Valley area, West Central Indiana, we seem to have a high free and reduced lunch number, and I think a relatively low number of folks signing up for 21st Century Scholars. What kind of experiences are you having on communities finding creative ways to get kids signed up? I've heard of research of starting counseling, career counseling earlier, maybe in middle school. Certainly, I think the success of the 21st Century Scholar Program shows us that, starting earlier leads to success. But any thoughts on how our region can improve our applications for 21st Century Scholars?
Yeah, a few different things. Earlier is better, right? The Department of Education, Indiana Department of Education, is doing its 3E grants. I'll get these in the wrong order, but I think it's Explore, Engage, and Experience. And that work actually came out of a task force that I was part of a few years back, looking at career counseling, career advising, career navigation. And, the general principle is to start exposing young students, young children in that K-5 space just what work is, that they're businesses, they're things people go do, right? The typical probably kindergartner or first grader might say, I want to be a firefighter or a doctor, right? Because that's what they know, right? That's their world, or they mention something because that's what one of their parents or one of their loved ones does. Great. But starting to expose them to what all is out here, having someone come in and talk about something the kids might find interesting related to a job. Visiting a manufacturing plant, which, by the way, I've spent a lot of time in those, and they're fascinating places, right?
Yeah.
But then as you get to the middle school stage, starting to engage students in a way that they can start exploring, what kind of interest do they have, both their aptitudes and their interest, and seeing where those might go. In Switzerland, they call it sniffing, which I think is just really, really kind of a funny term for kids who are in that sort of 7th and 8th grade area. They have intentional programs and intentional requirements for students to go out and kind of sniff around, if you will, to go spend time at this company or this place of business or this place, where you might have a job someday. So they just start understanding what they might want to do in that day, or when that day comes. And then the other thing is, I've seen some really unique work being done. Delaware County is a great example. One of our commission members, Judd Fisher, who's president of the Ball Foundation, and I were talking about not long ago. And and I'll circle back to something I said earlier, part of what I found and find so interesting about their approach is it's sort of an all hands on deck approach. So philanthropy supporting this, businesses engaged, certainly the schools are engaged, but also the not-for-profits, right? The organizations that serve children and families in the community have all made a concerted effort. And I wish I could remember what the percentages are, but I want to say it's over 80% sign up that they have. And I've heard of other instances like that around the state. So to me, that's the art of the possible, that they're doing it. I think we have to ask more folks like Judd Fisher. So how'd this happen? Who was the coalition of the willing, and what are the results you've got today? But my point being, communities are doing that. That's one example where I've heard just really very recently of what they're doing.
Yeah. So we have roughly here in Indiana 700,000+ people that have partially attended college and have not finished to get the credential. What can communities like West Central Indiana do to help folks finish their degrees?
Yeah, I think there are a number of things we can do. Employers are key to this. When you look at Indiana right now, we have a 2.2% unemployment rate. I think that's the latest. So vastly adults who want to be in the workplace are working. And many of those roughly 2 million working age Hoosier adults who need some additional training and education are working. I guess to somewhat be blunt about it, employers have leverage kind of like no one else does. That if I'm that individual and my employer says, "Hey, Chris, I know you're interested in doing more, or we would like you to do more. We'd like you to be a supervisor over here. Or we'd like you to do this or this." That employer both supporting and prodding along me as that individual can be the game changer. The Cook Group, Cook Medical in Bloomington, may be, in my estimation, the best example of where they're doing this, just stunningly well. There are a lot of examples, by the way. I think my old employer, Hillenbrand, does a great job at it. Old National Bank, and now I'm going to get into trouble because I'll start listing.
You left someone out.
Yeah, I'm going to leave somebody out. And there are a lot of great organizations doing this kind of work. But I think engaging employers and also sharing with employers some of the very best practices. One of the reasons, John, that a lot of folks don't take advantage of tuition reimbursement with their employer, and we found this in research, is that they don't have the personal cash flow to wait to be reimbursed after they've done the training or education, right? So here we are in July, right? And somebody says, I'm going to sign up for classes that start in August. I'll finish in December. I'll get my grades by early January. I'll give them to my employer, right? So I'm out of pocket in July, and I may not get reimbursed until February. There are so many folks who just either can't do that or aren't comfortable doing that. And I know my old employer, Ivy Tech, and others are changing the model in working with employers to say, hey, how about this? How about we hold the bill on any one of your employees? We'll send it to you after the term. If Chris doesn't make the C or something that you need him to make, we'll bill him separately, so you're not on the hook for that.
Right.
And we'll do that. And then the other thing is saying, ask your employee to fill out the FAFSA so we can see if they're financially, eligible for aid. Which, by the way, we also found that something like 30%, there was a reduction of something like 30%. More people eligible than what people sometimes realize. But employers are hugely important in this. Again, I would say that community and faith-based organizations are really important in this. We saw it during the pandemic when we, as a state, shifted the Workforce Ready grant, part of that to be the taking Hoosiers to the next level. We changed some of the parameters of it. And, just in a matter of weeks, we're able to sign up, I think it was around 3,000 individuals in 3 or 4 weeks for really high demand, high wage related training, short-term training and education. And, I saw it firsthand to a great degree. The folks who deserved credit for that were the community faith-based organizations. We went to them and said, hey, you're serving individuals who really need some help now. Here's a solution. You can reach those individuals better than we can. How can we partner to do that? I think those are some of the keys to reaching adults. Where are adults? It's just not as easy as saying, oh, well, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, they're over there at the high school, But we do know that vastly adults, we can find adults through place of employment or through those organizations like community and faith-based organizations.
Well, that's a great point. And sticking on adult education, here in West Central Indiana, we've got 13,000 plus folks without a high school diploma. And I know you're very familiar with the Goodwill Excel Center program and model. Can you speak a little bit to that, to the success we've seen in the state through that program?
I'm a fan, so I'll just state that at the get-go. The one meeting to which I was referring a while ago that I was in yesterday was with the person who runs all of that for Goodwill. And, the work with the Excel centers is just truly life-changing. Helping a person, get his high school diploma as an adult. And then, I think there's so many factors to it that are important. The adult education that they do for those individuals is wrapped with services that those individuals may need because they face a lot of barriers. But it's also wrapped with the intentionality that this is not the end. I think that my friends at Goodwill may correct me on this, but I believe over 40% of their graduating diploma students, their adult basic education students, head off to college. That's remarkable. So from moving to a place of not having a high school diploma to then being a college student. And by the way, I know a lot of them ended up matriculating and still do to Ivy Tech because they're, again, there's an intentionality to say, look, this is possible. But part of what they also do is embed within their training and education certifications that somebody can find, to be useful in the marketplace. Their model is really successful. There's certainly a lot of others that are, but I think part of their key, again, has been that some of the keys that I would look at are the services they wrap around the individual, the intentionality of saying, look, you're not coming here to get this and then that's it. What's the next step? Whether it's training and education, whether it's into the workforce. And the other component that I think is really important that they do is that they have a strong tie with employers. And again, I think that's just part of that long-term view of coming and getting your high school diploma is not the end game here. It's about a job, a better job, or a career. And they may say it differently, John, but those are three things that I've really admired about their work. They're highly intentional about all those things.
Yeah, we're having a good conversation in our region about pursuing funding for Goodwill Excel Center here. And Kent, who you mentioned, an ISU grad, has been part of those conversations. So I appreciate your insight on that. Well, as we come to an end, anything else you'd like to, any bits of wisdom you'd like to leave us with, Commissioner?
Well, it'd probably be pretty short on wisdom. So, but maybe just put this forth. First of all, thanks for having me. I just really appreciate this, and thanks for all the work you're doing too. You and I both know these are not easy lifts, but they are lifts that we have to do. Some things that I carry around with me every day. I'm sure at least my staff kind of says, "Oh boy, here we go again." But they are committed to this mission too. I carry around this. We've got a declining college going rates, 53%. It's been continuing to drop. We've got to staunch that. As you mentioned, 2 million working age Hoosier adults. We have students who are graduating from colleges and universities in Indiana, too many of whom are leaving. I want them to stay. We're 14th best at attracting students to stay or to come to Indiana or, come to one of our institutions, but we're 40th in keeping them. Again, so then that leads me to the next part. I look at it as an enormous opportunity to change some of these trajectories, whether it's increasing college going rate, reaching more adults, in a lot of creative ways through employers, through community faith-based organizations, getting more Hoosier graduating college and university students to stay here because it's a great place. I've spent all but 1 year of my life here. It's absolutely the best. But then also all of us realizing that the value proposition is something we have to talk about with college and training and education beyond high school. It pays off. It just absolutely pays off, whether that's in lower unemployment rates, higher wages, higher net worth, longer lifespan. The average lifespan, life expectancy for someone with less than a high school diploma versus a bachelor's degree or higher is 12 years. 12 years difference in life expectancy. So those are things that I carry around, and also then wrapping up with understanding that our state is already doing some really good work. Let's just feed it and water it. Things like the 21st Century Scholars, the O'Bannon Grant, Indiana College Corps, those kind of things to help Hoosiers understand education beyond high school is first of all necessary. The outcomes can be very good, and that all of us who help to make these decisions and push for change have it within our grasp to make those differences.
Well, Commissioner, thanks for joining us, and I hope you'll be open to coming back and having further discussion. I think you and I could probably talk for hours, but appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, and thanks for having me.